beneath the calm surface of North America's waterways lies a secret, one that two of the world's biggest countries are quietly betting $8 billion on. It's not a new canal, not a high-speed rail, and not some futuristic mega project rising out of nowhere. It's something much older, something most people have forgotten even exists. A 65-year-old waterway that helped build modern North America. And now, against all odds, it's being brought back to life. Stretching over 2,300 miles, the St. Lawrence Seaway was once the pride of two nations, a living artery that connected the heart of the continent to the open Atlantic. It powered industries, moved billions in trade, and shaped entire cities along its path. But decades later, this old giant has started to rust. Trade slowed, ships grew too large, the world moved on. So the question now is simple. Why are the United States and Canada suddenly pouring billions into reviving it? What could possibly make an aging waterway worth such an enormous gamble? Today we're diving deep into that answer, from the birth of the Seaway to its decline, and the $8.4 billion bet that might just reshape the future of trade between two nations. To understand why this old waterway still matters today, we have to go back, way back, to when ships weren't made of steel, and every mile of the St. Lawrence River was a battle against nature. In the early 1800s, the river was already a lifeline for trade. It connected inland towns to the Atlantic, carried timber, grain, and ore to growing ports, and powered the expansion of both nations. But it was also a nightmare to navigate. Rapids near Montreal turned the journey into chaos. Whole sections of the river were impossible to cross. Ships would unload cargo, move it by land, and reload again downstream. It was slow, dangerous, and expensive. So engineers did what engineers always do when nature refuses to cooperate. They got creative. In 1825, the Lachine Canal opened, cutting through rock and swamp to create a safer, faster path around the rapids. It wasn't perfect, but it changed everything. For the first time, vessels could move freely from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, and the St. Lawrence River began its transformation from wild river to engineered artery. A century later, a new problem appeared: Niagara Falls. The natural wonder that drew tourists from around the world also stood like a massive no-entry sign for trade. The solution? The Welland Canal, a man-made detour built to lift ships more than 300 feet between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. Think of it as an elevator for freighters, 27 million gallons of water lifting and lowering steel giants between the two lakes. By the early 1900s, a patchwork of canals and locks connected the Great Lakes to the ocean. But as ships grew larger, that patchwork began to feel outdated, like trying to move modern cargo through a 19th century straw. Then came 1959. After decades of planning, arguments, and political drama, the St. Lawrence Seaway officially opened, a joint project between the US and Canada that forever changed the continent. At over 2,300 miles long with 15 massive locks and countless support channels, it was one of the most ambitious engineering feats of its time. Suddenly, ocean-going ships could sail straight from the Atlantic to cities like Toronto, Chicago, and Duluth. The Seaway turned the Great Lakes into a global trade hub, feeding entire industries. Steel, agriculture, mining, all of them boomed. It was a win-win for both countries and proof that collaboration could reshape geography itself. But like all giants, time eventually caught up. For decades, the St. Lawrence Seaway was unstoppable. It powered factories, fed farms, and fueled cities. By the late 20th century, the world had started moving faster, and the Seaway hadn't kept up. Ships got bigger, ports got deeper, supply chains stretched across oceans, and the once mighty Seaway, it started to feel a little narrow. The locks, once built for the largest ships of their time, could only handle vessels up to 766 feet long and 80 feet wide. That's impressive on paper, until you realize modern super freighters now average nearly 1,200 feet in length. In other words, the Seaway became too small for the big leagues. By the 1990s, shippers were choosing faster, cheaper routes. Global trade patterns shifted toward megaports like New York, Houston, and Vancouver, while the Seaway slowly lost relevance. And because fewer ships were passing through, less revenue came in, which meant maintenance budgets got tighter and repairs got delayed. The infrastructure itself was also aging. The locks, channels, and breakwaters built in the 1950s were now showing their age. concrete cracking, metal corroding, and machinery struggling under modern demands. It wasn't just an economic problem, it was an environmental one too. Ballast water from cargo ships carried invasive species between lakes, threatening ecosystems that had existed untouched for millennia. And as global emission standards tightened, the Seaway's older systems began to look like relics of a dirtier past. By the 2010s, something became painfully clear. If the US and Canada didn't act soon, one of North America's most important waterways could fade into history. So instead of watching it decline, both nations made a bold decision. Not just to save the Seaway, but to rebuild its future from the ground up. And by 2018, that decision turned into action. North America's most iconic waterway was officially getting its rebirth. So, Canada and the United States teamed up for one of the most ambitious binational infrastructure efforts in modern history, an $8.4 billion modernization plan designed to future-proof the Seaway for another half-century of trade. The mission, simple in theory, massive in execution. Make the Seaway stronger, cleaner, and smarter. Let's break it down. The hardware overhaul is where most of the money's going. That means locks, breakwaters, ports, and the navigation channels themselves, many of which haven't seen major upgrades since the Eisenhower era. Roughly $4.2 billion of the total budget is dedicated to rebuilding the waterway's critical structures. Of that, around $3 billion has already been invested, with another $1.2 billion still in progress through 2027. The locks, the heart of the Seaway, are being completely re-engineered with reinforced concrete, new hydraulics, and modern control systems. These upgrades will allow them to handle heavier ships with tighter precision and less downtime. Then there are the ports and terminals where global trade meets local industry. Over $2 billion has already been poured into upgrades, with more on the way. Docks are being deepened, cranes automated, and terminals optimized for intermodal transport, meaning cargo can transfer from ship to train to truck seamlessly, saving time and money. On the vessel side, more than $600 million has gone toward modernizing fleets, retrofitting ships with cleaner engines, advanced navigation, and fuel-efficient systems. That might not sound flashy, but for an industry built on razor-thin margins, it's revolutionary. But here's what really makes this project interesting. It's not just about steel and concrete, it's about innovation. The Seaway is adopting hands-free mooring systems, where ships latch onto the dock using vacuum pads instead of ropes, cutting docking times in half. It's also integrating AI-assisted voyage planning, allowing operators to calculate the most fuel-efficient routes and reduce emissions. And on the sustainability side, the transformation has been dramatic. Since 2005, the Seaway has reduced its carbon footprint by over 69%, far exceeding Canada's national emissions targets, and specifically at the Welland Canal. New hydroelectric plants now use the same water that moves ships to power operations, cutting nearly 39,000 tons of CO2 every year. I know what you might be thinking though. Why put all this work and money for what seems to be a relic of the past? Well, when you see what flows through this system, it's easy to understand why both nations are trying to keep it alive. The St. Lawrence Seaway isn't just a channel of water, it's an artery that keeps the heart of North America's economy beating. Each year, more than 143 million tons of cargo move through the Great Lakes Seaway system. Grain, iron ore, coal, steel, cement, petroleum, and even wind turbine parts. All told, that's over $15 billion in goods passing through its locks and ports annually. But that's only part of the picture. Factor in the industries it supports: manufacturing, energy, agriculture, and logistics, and the Seaway underpins a staggering $6 trillion regional economy that stretches from Minnesota to Montreal. If that region were its own country, it would rank as the third largest economy in the world, barely pulling ahead of powerhouses like Japan and Germany. Then there are the people behind it. Roughly 241,000 jobs depend on this system, from dock workers and engineers to farmers shipping crops and miners exporting iron ore. Every barge, tugboat, and freighter moving through the Seaway isn't just transporting goods, it's carrying livelihoods. And here's where the investment pays off. For every $1 spent on Seaway modernization, analysts estimate a return of nearly $4 in long-term economic activity. Through faster shipping, reduced congestion, and lower fuel costs. That's not just maintenance, that's strategy. Yet for all the numbers, this project isn't only about economics, it's about identity. The Seaway built cities like Buffalo, Cleveland, and Toronto. It turned quiet lakeside towns into industrial giants. Today, those same places are putting their faith back in the water, hoping this modernization wave brings not just jobs, but a smarter, cleaner kind of growth. Because this revival isn't just about patching up the past, it's about redefining what a waterway can mean in the modern world. For decades, this route was the industrial workhorse of North America, carrying bulk goods and fueling cities. But now, it's transformed into something smarter, cleaner, and more resilient. Automation and AI-driven logistics are being integrated into navigation systems, allowing ships to travel more efficiently and safely. Green shipping corridors are in the works, routes that prioritize low-emission vessels powered by biofuels, hydrogen, and even electricity. And in a world where global trade is shifting fast, the Seaway's upgrades mean it can finally compete again, accommodating larger ships, cutting transit times, and slashing costs. But what's most striking is how two countries with different currencies, governments, and priorities have managed to move in complete lockstep. The US and Canada have turned a shared waterway into a shared mission, blending engineering, diplomacy, and sustainability into one project. And that partnership may prove to be the Seaway's greatest achievement of all. Because this isn't just a canal being rebuilt, it's a connection being renewed, a symbol that even in an age of digital trade routes and instant communication, physical infrastructure still matters. And as those final locks are reinforced and the last concrete walls rise into place, the Seaway quietly returns to doing what it's always done best, bringing nations together one ship at a time. So, from its historic past to its billion-dollar rebirth, the St. Lawrence Seaway is once again proving that old infrastructure can still shape the future. But what do you think? Can this old waterway really make a comeback? Or are we just putting fancy locks on a sinking ship? And if you had $8 billion, what would you do with it? Mega project or mega vacation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love diving into the world's biggest and boldest engineering projects, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned.